had to grab my other backpack. I drained the hell out of the other one.
8 months before, and I got a frantic call from the person.
Can you say this is 20 years later, 9/11. This is 20-year anniversary.
And I said, Mary, I'm fine. I'm in Midtown. This is happening in downtown. She didn't really understand.
This is kind of stuff we should never forget.
City, and it couldn't have been more than a few minutes later that I glanced at a TV and I saw smoke billowing from the E-ring of the Pentagon where she worked.
Like I said, I was getting ready to go take a shower, and when my coworker banged the door, he was like, "Tom, you gotta turn the TV on."
And left.
So one of the planes just flew in the trade tower. Like, what?
For hours.
So I turned it on, and sure enough.
And all kinds of calls like that. I remember.
Yeah, so the plane, it was like the north one.
To my parents.
Then when we were still watching TV, I was getting ready. Then all of a sudden, I was just getting ready to go in the shower, and all of a sudden, plane struck the south one. I'm like, what the hell? We're looking at each other like, dude, this is a terrorist attack.
The E-ring suffered its partial collapse at 10:15 a.m. There is the flag-draped exterior of the E-ring.
And I remember after I took my quick shower, we went to work. We were probably like, oh, I don't know, half an hour into work, and that's like, and all of a sudden, that's when the South Tower collapsed. And we just kept watching it. We tried to do some work, but we just kept thinking about it. When the North collapsed, we were like, dude, I can't do this, bro. Man, this is too much overwhelming for me. The Pentagon, the trade towers are collapsing.
He still works there.
At Flight 93 up at Shanksville.
The plane, the fuselage came within a few feet of him. And yet, as you know, a number of people in the Pentagon returned to work the very next day.
Yeah, the terrorists in this case hit a place that doesn't scare easily, and it remained true to form. Mr. Secretary, thank you.
Thank you.
Great to see you. Thanks, Jay Johnson.
We're coming up in the moment of silence for the North Tower
Let's
collapsed.
continue to check back in with these three venues, these three scenes as we watch them unfold. Doesn't get any easier. These are pictures from New York, just down behind where we are.
They're still naming out the names that died in the trade towers and those two flights.
At the Pentagon and in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. We have the two leading dignitaries there are the former President of the United States, George W. Bush, and the current Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris. It is now U.S. Park Service, Parkland. We recommend to anyone in the area of Shanksville to go see it. It's a striking sight, just part of our remembrance today.
There's Kamala Harris right there, right in the back.
President Biden has left Ground Zero, the site here in New York. Motorcade helicopter.
Looks like he's flying back on the helicopter.
Air Force One, and will be leaving for Shanksville.
Oh.
He's going to be present at all three sites today.
Wow.
Yeah, and they announced that schedule just a few days ago, I think. The president released a statement yesterday. He's not making remarks at any of these venues, but I remember one of his interviews after the attacks. He was a powerful, he was the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, or a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So he has lived this history in all three locations, probably with some of these families today.
When you look at 43 today, through the lens of 20 years, what hits you?
I have cried most of this morning. I had just stopped, but you got me crying again. I mean, what hits me is how moved I know he still is by what
there wasn't one American that didn't cry on 9/11 when it happened.
And I mentioned earlier, he carried around the badge.
And sometimes when you see the memories, it's going to bring you some tearful, painful memories. It's going to make you cry.
For as long as I know
that's the thing. That's the thing. If you sit there, you cry and you get moved by emotions, you're a real person.
Of these families that are up now, in some instances, grandchildren who didn't meet, grandfathers or grandmothers that were lost that day. So when I see him there, I know how much he was stirred and moved. And I know everything that happened during his presidency is extremely polarizing as a policy matter. But as a human being, I think he sought to protect the country he loved and led for those 8 years.
Our friends Andrea Mitchell and Hallie Jackson are down at the Pentagon. And guys, I have to say, it struck me listening to Secretary Austin, former General Austin, and General Milley, that these are among our most heavily decorated veterans by dint of the fact that they fought in sustained combat in one or both of the wars launched in the name of the attacks 20 years ago that we mark today.
In fact, Brian, General Austin was part of the invasion of Iraq, and then, of course, at CENTCOM, running the operations in Afghanistan, General Milley as well. And as you heard from both of them today, they were really speaking about September 11th and everything that's come since, and honoring the families and the victims. The most recent victims, those 13 Marines. And actually, General Austin just this week was in Kuwait. Just this past week, he'd gone to Doha and Ramstein and Kuwait, and he met not only collectively with those 13 Marines, but individually, and abandoned the schedule, spent time with every one of them. Those were the 13 Marines, but the Marines who had guarded the airport, those Marines that are now in Kuwait, and lost 13 of their brothers and sisters. And there's obviously a great deal of trauma and suffering, and of course they're responding to the call of duty, and what they did with that evacuation was remarkable, as we all, of course, think of those left behind. But also the issue of security and how security has changed in our country since 9/11, which is, profoundly different. At this point, in 9/11, we did not have the Department of Homeland Security. We're talking to Jay Johnson. He also served as general counsel in the Pentagon, of course, in the first part of the Obama years before he took over DHS. And there's still questions being raised over whether DHS is too big, whether immigration, for instance, should be taken out of it. But the lack of coordination, the lack of information sharing that occurred on 9/11 could not, we believe, we hope, be replicated today. One thing that really struck me, Brian and Nicole, on 9/11, the FAA did not share the information that the first plane had been hijacked until that plane had hit the World Trade Center. There was such a lack of coordination in the government that no one knew that a plane had been hijacked, but the FAA knew. But that's the kind of information that was, as the 9/11 Commission reported, stovepiped. And now, of course, we hope it would be shared. We hope that we can imagine the security threats, but still we have Al-Qaeda reforming. And as Jeremy Bash was telling us earlier, and Nick Rasmussen, you can talk about over the horizon, but we don't have bases close by. And we don't have boots on the ground any longer in Afghanistan. And we have ISIS-K, we have Al-Qaeda, which is part of the Taliban, the horrific Haqqani network now in the cabinet. So we have to really be concerned about the ground truth that we can't get from drones that are dispatched from bases far away.
Brian and Nicole, I know we just watched President Biden get on Air Force One for his next stop this morning. You both talked about how emotional this day is. You feel that here, I think, very intensely. And I was struck by something that Secretary Austin said. And, Secretary Johnson and Nicole and Brian, you talked about it too. Secretary Austin said, we still work here. They worked here the day after. The Pentagon opened the day after September 11th. And to so many people in the country, it was a sign of such resilience. And you have to remember, this is an enormous building, right? This is a huge building. And on September 11th, when you talk to survivors, when you read the accounts of people who were there, when you read, for example, the memoir from then Secretary Rumsfeld, some people didn't realize what had happened when the plane actually hit this building. It happened on the opposite side from where we are. And remember, it was closed for renovations. Many of the offices in that part of the building were actually closed for renovations. So there are estimates that twice as many people could have been in the building that morning had that not been the case. But there were people who were on different parts of the building, different sides of it, who I spoke with one survivor who was trying to get information about what had happened in New York, couldn't, because nothing was working. Everybody was overloading, the computer systems at the time. And he was on the phone with his wife when he heard the plane crashed into the building. Same with Rumsfeld, who was in his office, who actually went to the site where it happened. He picked up, he wrote about it in his memoir, a piece of debris from that site. At one point, people did not know where the defense secretary actually was.
The president didn't know.
The president didn't know. You know, Andy Card was talking about that command, and Nicole, you talked about it too, when President Bush reaffirmed the authorization that the then vice president had given to go after civilian aircraft in the sky, and what a horrific moment that was. And at one point, just to highlight the confusion and the way that things were moving so quickly in the day, Cheney said to Rumsfeld on a call, I understand we've taken out a plane. And Rumsfeld said, I cannot confirm that, because to his knowledge, that had not been the case. Of course, that hadn't happened.
They thought that the plane in Shanksville was actually a plane that they had taken out. And you see those pictures, Brian and Nicole, of Karen Hughes and Condoleezza Rice and Dick Cheney in the bunker, and the president wanting to go back, but as Andy Card recounts, the Secret Service say you can't, going on to Nebraska. But the fact is, we didn't have cell service. I was trying to call my parents, and of course...
Oh, cell service was pretty much down. Everybody's trying to overload it. Internet was so slow as a skunk.
Got turned back over the Atlantic because they didn't have any space left. In Canada, where all the international flights were landing, so I didn't hear from him until 2:59 in the afternoon, when my cell phone rang. Finally, the old flip phone. I was getting ready to go on the air.
I remember I going after going home to work after my buddy and I tried to go to the golf course a couple times and want to know if they're still open.
He said, "What's happening back in the?"
It was just lying busy, so I tried half an hour again. I said, "Yeah, y'all open? Yeah, we are. Cool."
He was going to government.
So yeah, because the phone lines, the landlines were jammed up.
The communication and the panic, we talked about it earlier, we thought, we didn't know what was happening, but we saw the smoke coming out of the Pentagon, and that was, just so terrifying.
Even the comms coming out of the Pentagon, Andrea, were not good. Secretary Rumsfeld had talked about and had written about how he was trying to be in touch with the president, who was on Air Force One. It wasn't great comms, but they patched that call through anyway, right? Even though it sounded terrible, because they knew that was going to be the most important thing. That's actually why Rumsfeld did not want to leave this building, because he knew that he needed to have those comms. They sent the then deputy secretary out to a site outside the Beltway just to have somebody as part of leadership be off site. But even in that moment, as in Nicole, the National Military Command Center here at the Pentagon it was filling with smoke. The air quality was so awful because of so much carbon dioxide in the air. That was the conditions under which people in this building were working on September 11th. And remember, there are many people in that building who are still here today, who are struggling, frankly, with things like survivor's guilt, right? Split-second decisions, a moment to go see a colleague or to go down the hall, change the course of their lives. And that is a moment today, 20 years later, everybody reflects on it every year on 9/11, but it's so important and so poignant today.
One of the surviving families, Don Marshall, was talking about trying to get to his wife in the Pentagon here and seeing the smoke, and the fireman couldn't get in, so he realized he couldn't, and that he realized he had a child in daycare in the Pentagon and needed to be a father and not have another child orphaned by this disaster.
The day that changed all of us 20 years ago.
I think we're coming up on when the North Tower collapsed.
Jackson on duty at the Pentagon today. Thanks. So discordant again to hear the sound of jet aircraft. Of course, given the Pentagon's location hard alongside National Airport, it is understandable. But on this day of all days, we're joined by a good friend of both of ours, the eminent presidential historian and author, Michael Beschloss. Michael, I have an odd question to begin with, and it may require more time, thought, and attention than we have here. But tell me, is it a dotted line? Is it a red line? How did we get from this event we mark today, this hole in the earth, the worst tragedy in modern American history, certainly, to our current times, to the site of Nazi protesters on the campus of the university that Thomas Jefferson
That's going to take a while to answer that, and you know it.
Trying to change the course of a presidential election and ransacking our capital.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
with
Brian,
Ashley
and I'll
Babbitt
do
getting
it
shot in the
fast.
Capitol.
It's been 20 years that have in many ways been extremely rough. We've had two wars in Afghanistan and Iraq that where American support among the people for those wars ebbed, and the presidents involved were never able to quite explain why we were there and risking American lives and risking American treasure. Another thing is that we felt after 9/11 that our government could not protect us from something that we had been protected from all during World War II and through the Cold War. There was never a direct major attack on American territory. This took us back to the sense of insecurity that